The doorbell rang on a Sunday morning. I was not expecting anyone. I had my coffee going, my slippers on, and the small quiet of a Sunday morning wrapped around me like something I did not want to disturb. My cat, Biscuit, was on the windowsill doing what he always does, watching the birds in the yard with the calm patience of someone who has given up catching them but has not yet given up watching. It was, in every way, a perfectly ordinary morning. I set my cup down and went to the door. And there she was. Kendra. My daughter-in-law. The woman who, 14 months ago, had stood in my own living room and said things to me that I had never in my life expected to hear. Things I had replayed so many times in the quiet of this house that I could not tell anymore where the memory ended and the wound began. She was standing on my porch with her hands folded in front of her. She was not wearing her usual confidence, that polished, put-together version of herself I had always known. She looked smaller somehow. Her eyes were a little red around the edges. She was wearing a plain gray coat, and her hair was loose in a way she never usually wore it, and she looked, if I am being honest, like someone who had not slept well in a long time. She said, "Hi, Carol. I was wondering if we could talk." I stood at the door for a moment. Just a moment. Long enough to feel all the things move through me. The old hurt, the old anger, the part of me that wanted to say, "No, Sandra, we cannot talk, not after what you said, not after what you did." All of that moved through me in about 3 seconds. And then I opened the door wider. I said, "Come in." Because that is who I am. I have never been able to keep a door closed against someone who comes with an open face. Even when I probably should. She sat at my kitchen table. The same table where the worst of it had happened, which neither of us mentioned. I poured her a coffee without asking. She took it with both hands the way people do when they need something warm to hold. And then she said, "I came to say sorry." I sat across from her. I looked at this woman, the mother of my grandchildren, the wife of my son, the person who had taken so much from me without ever once raising her voice, and I thought, after everything, after all of it, she came. I want to tell you what happened. All of it. From the very beginning. Because sorry is a powerful word. But it is only the beginning of a story, not the end of one. My name is Carol. I am 69 years old. I live alone in the house my husband Frank and I bought 38 years ago, when the neighborhood was younger and so were we, and we had a baby on each hip and a third one on the way and more hope than sense. Frank passed 11 years ago. Cancer. The slow kind, which is its own particular cruelty. Enough time to say everything you need to say, but also enough time to watch a person you love become someone smaller than themselves. By the end he was not the man I married, not in his body. But in his eyes always. Right until the very last day. The eyes were always frank. I still talk to him sometimes. Not in a strange way, I am not confused about where he is. Just in the way long married people keep talking to each other even when one of them is gone. I will be pulling weeds in the garden and I will say out loud, "Frank, the roses are coming in strong this year," and somehow that is enough. I have 3 children. My oldest, Deborah, lives in Portland with her husband and 2 teenage boys who call me Grandma Carol and eat everything in my refrigerator when they visit. My youngest, Thomas, lives locally and comes for dinner every Wednesday like clockwork, which I love him for. And then there is my middle child. My son Kevin. Kevin is 41 years old. He is a good man, kind, steady, the kind of man who fixes things when they break and shows up when he says he will. He has his father's way of going quiet when he is thinking through something important, and his father's laugh when something genuinely catches him off guard. He looks a great deal like Frank, which sometimes makes me catch my breath a little when he walks through a door. Kevin met Sandra when they were both 32. She was a project manager at a firm he did some consulting work for. He brought her to Thanksgiving that first year, just 2 months after they started dating, which told me he was serious before he had said as much. Sandra was impressive. That is the right word. She walked into a room and you felt it. She was sharp and composed and funny in a dry, intelligent way, and she had opinions about things and was not afraid to share them. Kevin was a little quieter than her, but they balanced each other well. She brought energy, he brought steadiness. I could see why he loved her. I liked her. Genuinely. She was not the easiest person to get close to. She had a reserve about her, a slight distance that never fully went away even once you knew her well. But I respected that. Not everyone is built for warmth at close range. I understood that. They married 3 years after they met. A beautiful wedding. Sandra had exquisite taste. Everything was elegant and perfectly arranged, and Kevin looked at her the way Frank used to look at me, and I thought, yes, this is right. In the early years of the marriage, things were good. Not perfect. Sandra and I were very different kinds of women, and we both knew it. But good. Respectful. We found a rhythm. I was careful not to overstep. She was careful to include me in the important things. It was the kind of relationship that works because both people are making an effort, even when the effort is a little visible. Then they had the children. First came Emma, and then 2 years later little Jake. Grandchildren change everything. I say this as someone who did not fully understand it until it happened. The love that hits you the first time you hold your child's child is completely unlike anything else. It is bigger than you expect and softer at the same time. Emma was born, and I held her, and I thought, here is something new to love. A whole new chapter of loving. I tried to be a present grandmother without being an overbearing one. I babysat when asked. I brought food but did not show up uninvited. I bit my tongue when I disagreed with parenting choices because they were not my children to raise, they were mine to love. I did all the things a mother-in-law is supposed to do. Stay in my lane, support from the side, make myself useful without making myself the center of things. For a while it worked. But as Emma and Jake got older, and as the everyday business of raising children put more pressure on Kevin and Sandra's home, things began to shift. Small tensions that had always been there started to show themselves more. Sandra was a perfectionist. Everything in her house had a place and a system, and disruption to that system stressed her. I sometimes disrupted things without meaning to. A dish put in the wrong cabinet. An activity I did with the grandchildren that was not on her approved list. A comment I made about something taken differently than I meant it. I tried to adjust. I tried to be more careful. But there is a limit to how careful a person can be in someone else's home before the carefulness starts to feel like walking on glass, and eventually something shifts in you. You either speak up or you start to shrink. I had always been a woman who spoke up. That was the beginning of the problem. It started with small disagreements. The kind that every family has and that most families survive. There was the afternoon I took Emma to get ice cream without checking with Sandra first. Emma had asked me, I had said yes, and we went. It was a 15-minute trip. When we came back, Sandra was standing at the kitchen counter, and her face was tight in that particular way I had learned to read over the years. Not angry outwardly, but very controlled. She said, I would appreciate it if you checked with me before taking Emma anywhere. I said, of course. I am sorry, I did not think twice about it. She said, Emma has a routine. I need to know where she is. You are absolutely right, I said. It will not happen again. And it did not. But something about that exchange stayed. Not the disagreement itself. I understood her point. She was the mother, her rules were her rules. What stayed was the tone. The tight, managed quality of it. The sense that I was being corrected in the way you correct an employee who has made a procedural error. Then there was the birthday party. Emma's 5th birthday. Sandra had planned an elaborate party. Themed, decorated, catered. The kind of children's party that is really for the parent's Instagram page as much as it is for the child. I had offered to help, and Sandra had given me one task. Pick up the balloons from the party store. I picked up the balloons. But they had gotten the color order wrong at the store. They gave me pink and white when the theme was pink and gold. I called Sandra from the car to tell her, and she went very quiet on the phone and then said, Carol, I need those exact colors. The whole setup is coordinated. I said, I understand. I told them it was wrong. They said they can redo them, but it will take 45 minutes. She said, the party starts in an hour. I said, I know. I am sorry. It was their mistake. She said, can you just go back and wait for them? I did. I waited 45 minutes in the parking lot of a party store. I got the balloons with 7 minutes to spare. I drove 15 miles over the speed limit, which is not something I do. I arrived at the party breathless, holding 30 gold and pink balloons, and Sandra took them from me without a word of acknowledgement. Kevin saw my face. He said quietly, thanks, Mom. Really? I smiled and went to find Emma. These things built. One on top of the other. Each one small enough to dismiss on its own, but together creating a kind of weight that I felt every time I pulled into their driveway. A low-level bracing. A checking of myself before I walked through the door. Am I going to say the wrong thing today? Am I going to disrupt the system? I talked to my daughter Deborah about it. Deborah is practical in the way that oldest children often are. She listened to everything I said and then she said, "Mom, you need to have an honest conversation with Sandra." I said, "I am not sure that will go well." She said, "Maybe not. But it is better than letting it fester." She was right. I knew she was right. I chose a Sunday afternoon when Kevin and Sandra came for lunch at my house. After we ate, Kevin took the kids to the backyard to kick a ball around, and Sandra and I were alone at the table with the last of our coffee. I said, "Sandra, can I say something?" She looked up. Careful. Alert. I said, "I feel like there has been some tension between us lately, and I want to address it directly rather than let it sit. I think I sometimes do things that frustrate you without meaning to, and I would rather know what those things are so I can do better." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I appreciate you saying that. Is there something specific?" I asked. Another pause. And then she said, "Carol, I think you and I have very different ideas about boundaries. And it is something I have been trying to manage for a while." I said, "Tell me what you mean." She said, "I mean that sometimes I feel like the way you do things in this family, the way you involve yourself, does not always leave room for Kevin and me to do things our own way. As a couple. As parents." I said, "Can you give me an example?" She said, "The ice cream. The way you talk to Emma about certain things without running them by me. The way you sometimes give Kevin advice that undermines the decisions we have made together." I said, "Sandra, I have never meant to undermine anything." She said, "I know you have not meant to. But intention is not the same as impact." That phrase, "intention is not the same as impact," landed in me strangely. Not because it was wrong. It is not wrong. But because of the way it was delivered. Precise and measured and slightly clinical, as if this were a performance review rather than a conversation between two women who both loved the same man. I said, "I hear what you are saying, and I will do better. But I also want to say, I am Kevin's mother. I have been part of this family for 41 years. I would like to feel like I am still welcome to be present without every small thing being held against me." Something moved across her face. Something quick that I could not quite name. She said, "Of course you are welcome. No one is saying otherwise." We finished our coffee. Kevin and the children came back inside. The afternoon moved forward. Everything looked normal on the surface. But that night, alone in my house, I felt uneasy in a way I could not shake. Something about the conversation had not felt like a clearing of the air. It had felt like the drawing of a line. Like Sandra had heard everything I said and I had heard everything she said, and we had both walked away from the table with our positions slightly more entrenched than when we sat down. The months that followed confirmed that feeling. Kevin called less. Not completely, not dramatically, but less. When he did call, he was careful in the way Sandra sometimes was careful. Measured. He stopped talking about things at home the way he used to. He had always been open with me, again his father's son, but that openness narrowed. Conversations became surface level. He asked about my garden. I asked about the children. We talked around the center of things rather than at it. Sandra and I maintained a polite distance. We smiled at family dinners. We said the right things. But something between us had hardened. The respect was still visible, but the warmth was gone. And respect without warmth is a cold thing to sit with across a holiday table. I started spending more time with Thomas and Deborah. I filled my weeks. I had my garden, my book club, my friend Marilyn who lived 2 streets over and had known me for 30 years and who always had a pot of tea and a sharp sense of humor ready when I needed it. I told myself I was fine. But you cannot fool yourself completely. Not at 69 years old. Not when you have lived long enough to know the difference between fine and merely functioning. I was merely functioning. Then came the night everything broke open. It was Christmas Eve. I had hosted Christmas Eve every year for as long as I could remember. It was the tradition Frank and I started when Kevin was a baby. The whole family together at our house, the tree lit, the food made from scratch, the children in their pajamas by 9 o'clock. After Frank died, I kept it going. It was my way of keeping something of him alive in the family. His presence in the ritual, even when he was no longer there to sit at the head of the table. This particular Christmas Eve, Deborah and her family had flown in. Thomas was coming. Kevin and Sandra were bringing Emma and Jake. I had been cooking for 2 days. The house smelled like everything good, roast chicken and sweet potatoes and the cinnamon candles Frank used to love. Everyone arrived within half an hour of each other. The house was full of noise and children and the particular warmth that comes from a family genuinely glad to be together. Emma ran straight to me and wrapped herself around my legs and said, "Grandma Carol," in that loud, unself-conscious way that 5-year-olds do things, and I picked her up and spun her once and everything felt in that moment exactly right. Dinner was wonderful. Loud and warm and a little chaotic the way the best dinners are. Thomas made everyone laugh. Deborah's boys talked about sports with Kevin. Jake fell asleep on the sofa with his mouth open before the dessert was even served. And then later in the evening, the children were settled, the adults were on their second glasses of wine, the dishwasher was running. Sandra and I ended up alone in the kitchen. I was putting away the last of the serving dishes. She was refilling her glass. For a moment it was just quiet. Then she said without looking at me, "The kids had a good time tonight." "They always do," I said. Pause. Then she said, still not looking at me, "Carol, I want you to know that I have been thinking about our conversation a few months ago." I set the dish down. She said, "I think I was not entirely fair. I said some things in a way that I think came across more harshly than I meant." I was surprised. I had not expected this. I said, "I appreciate you saying that, Sandra." She turned to face me then. And something happened that I had not expected at all. Her composure, which was always immaculate, cracked slightly. Just at the edges. Her jaw went tight for a moment and then she said, "I find this family very hard sometimes. I grew up differently. My family was very separate, independent. And this family is very together. Very present with each other. And I find it," she paused, "overwhelming sometimes." I looked at her. This was the most real she had ever been with me. And I felt something shift in me, not forgiveness exactly but understanding. Softening. I said, "Sandra, I know we are a lot. Frank always said we were a lot. It was never meant to be overwhelming." She nodded. She seemed like she was trying to say something more. Then Deborah walked in and Kevin came in behind her and the moment passed. Sandra straightened up. Her composure returned. The conversation was over before it was finished. I went to bed that night thinking, perhaps we turned a corner. Perhaps this is the beginning of something better. I was wrong. 3 days after Christmas, Kevin called me. His voice was different, flat in a way that made my stomach drop before he said a single word. He said, "Mom, Sandra and I need to talk to you about something. Can you come over?" I drove to their house. They were both there sitting on the sofa together. Kevin had his hands clasped. Sandra was composed, fully composed, the kitchen moment completely gone. Kevin said, "Mom, Sandra has shared some concerns with me about the way things have been, and we wanted to address them directly with you." I said, "All right." Sandra said, "Carol, I want to be honest with you. I feel like there is a pattern of behavior that has been affecting our home life for a long time. And I think for the sake of everyone, Kevin, the children, all of us, I need to name it directly." I said, "Please do." She said, "I feel that you consistently overstep. With the children, with Kevin, with the way you insert yourself into decisions that are ours to make. I feel that you use the history of this family, Frank, the traditions, the way things have always been done, as a way to keep control. And I feel that when I try to establish boundaries, you dismiss them." I was very still. She continued, "I also feel that you talk to Kevin about our marriage in ways that are not appropriate. That you use your closeness with him to influence him in ways that go beyond what a mother should do." I said, "Sandra, that is a very serious thing to say." She said, "I know it is." I looked at Kevin. He was looking at his hands. I said, "Kevin." He looked up. I said, "Have I ever said anything to you about your marriage that was inappropriate?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Mom, Sandra feels strongly about this." "That is not what I asked," I said. I asked if I have ever said anything inappropriate to you about your marriage. Another pause. Then, not directly. But sometimes I think you say things in a way that is meant to make me see Sandra in a certain light. I felt something break open in my chest. Not loudly. Just a quiet, clean break. I said, Kevin, I have never once tried to come between you and Sandra. I have never once said a word against her to you. And if you believe that I have, then something has gone very wrong. I looked at Sandra. He was watching me. Composed. Certain. I said, Sandra, I do not know what I have done to make you feel this way. But I want you to know something. I'm not your enemy. I have never been your enemy. I am a woman who loves her son and her grandchildren and who has tried, perhaps imperfectly, to be a good presence in this family. If that has not come across that way, if I have genuinely done things that hurt you, I am sorry for that. Genuinely. She said, thank you for saying that. But her tone said something different. Her tone said, the conversation is over and the verdict was already decided before you arrived. I stood up. I collected my coat and my bag. I said, I am going to go home now. I think we all need some time. Kevin walked me to the door. He looked like a man who had been on the losing side of something he did not fully understand. At the door I said very quietly, I love you, Kevin. That is not going to change. But I need you to know, I would never do to you what has been described tonight. And one day I hope you will know that clearly. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Then he said, I love you too, Mom. I drove home in the dark. That was 14 months ago. And now Sandra was sitting at my kitchen table telling me she came to say sorry. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and sat back down across from her. She had her hands wrapped around her mug. She had not yet looked at me directly. She had been looking at the table, at her hands, at the small crack in the glaze on the side of her mug. It was not the behavior of a woman performing an apology. It was the behavior of someone who was actually afraid of what they were about to say. I waited. She said, I need to start from the beginning. I said, all right. She said, the things I said to you in December, about the marriage, about you influencing Kevin, I said them because I was angry. And I said them because I believed them. At the time. Because Kevin had been coming to you about things. I knew that. I could feel it. And I did not handle that well. Instead of talking to Kevin about it, I made it about you. I made you the problem when the real problem was between me and Kevin. I listened. She said, I know that what I said that night changed things. I know it hurt you. And I know Kevin saw it happen, and I think it hurt him too, even though he went along with it. He has always gone along with me when I push hard enough. That is something about him that I have not always been fair with. I said carefully, why are you telling me this now, Sandra? She was quiet. Then she said, because Kevin and I went to counseling. I had not known this. She said, we started 6 months ago. Things between us had gotten worse, not better, after December. Kevin was withdrawn. He was unhappy in a way he could not explain. And eventually it came out, in sessions with our counselor, that a lot of what he was carrying was about what happened with you. He felt like he had let his mother down. He felt like he had been put in an impossible position and chosen wrong. She stopped. The counselor asked him to describe you, she said. Who you were. What kind of mother you had been. And he talked for 20 minutes without stopping. She paused. I sat there and I listened. And I realized, I think somewhere along the way I stopped seeing you as a person. I saw you as a presence that I needed to manage. As something that took Kevin's attention away from us. And that was not fair. That was not right. The kitchen was very quiet. I said, Sandra, can I tell you something? She looked up. Her eyes were red. I said, I know I am not the easiest mother-in-law. I know I am present in a way that not everyone is comfortable with. Frank always said I took up more space than I realized, and he meant it lovingly, but it was also true. I come from a family where everything was shared. Every meal, every problem, every good piece of news. That is just how I was made. And I know that can be overwhelming for someone who grew up differently. She nodded very slightly. But I want you to understand something, I said. When I pushed back that night, when I refused to accept what was being said about me, It was not because I did not care about your feelings. It was because what was being said was not true. And I could not accept something that was not true about myself, no matter how uncomfortable that made things. My integrity was the one thing I had left. He said, I know. I understand that now. I said, what did Kevin say? When you told him you were coming here? He said, tell her I am sorry too. She paused. And tell her I love her. I pressed my hand flat on the table, steadying myself. I said, where is he now? She said, he is home with the children. He wanted to come. I asked him to let me do this alone first. I felt like I owed you that, a direct apology without him there to make it easier for either of us. I looked at her for a long moment. And I thought about all the things I could say. The 14 months of Sunday mornings without my grandchildren. The Christmas Eves I had spent with Thomas and Deborah, grateful for their presence but aware of the empty chairs. The nights I had lain awake turning that December evening over and over, looking for the place where I could have done differently, handled it better, been more of something or less of something. The way I had whispered to Frank in the dark. I do not know how this happened. I thought about all of that. And then I let it sit there, acknowledged, and looked at the woman across my kitchen table. I said, Sandra, I accept your apology. She let out a breath. Long and shaky. I said, but I want to be honest with you the way you have been honest with me today. Things cannot go back to what they were before December. Not because I have not forgiven you, I am working on that and I think I will get there. But because what we had before December was not as solid as either of us thought. We were both managing each other from a distance, and that is not a relationship. That is just two people being polite in the same room. She was listening carefully. I said, I would like us to do better than that. I would like us to actually know each other. Not perform knowing each other. Actually know each other. That means both of us being honest when something is wrong before it becomes December. It means you telling me when I have overstepped, and me actually hearing it instead of defending. It means I stop pretending I do not feel things and you stop managing me like a problem to be solved. She said quietly, I would like that too. I said, I want to see my grandchildren. Her face changed. Softer. She said, Emma has been asking about you every week. Every single week. She asks Kevin when Grandma Carol is coming. Jake is only 3 but he asks too in his way. He goes to the window when we drive through your neighborhood and looks out. I had to look away for a moment. Biscuit had moved from the windowsill to the chair beside me, which he sometimes did when I was upset as if he could tell. I put my hand on his back. When I looked back, Sandra was watching me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Unguarded. Without the careful composure. She said, Can I ask you something? I said, yes. She said, what was Frank like? I looked at her. Of all the things I had expected her to say, that was not one of them. I said, why? She said, because Kevin talks about him the way I have always wished I could talk about my own father. And I think I have been a little jealous of that. Of how much Kevin loves his family. His history. How much he loves you. She stopped. My family was not like yours. We did not hold on to each other that way. And instead of letting myself want that, instead of letting myself into it, I kept the door closed. Because it felt safer. I was quiet for a long time. Then I said, Frank was the steadiest person I have ever known. He never raised his voice. He never held grudges. He had this way of walking into a room where everything just settled. Like the temperature changed. She smiled. A real one. Unmanaged. I said, he would have liked you, Sandra. He would have seen past the composure. He always did. Her eyes filled up again. She pressed her lips together. I said, stay for lunch. She looked up. I said, I have soup on the stove. Call Kevin. Tell him to bring the children. She held her phone for a second. Then she said, are you sure? I said, I am 69 years old, Sandra. I do not have time to not be sure. She laughed. Surprised and real and slightly tearful all at once. She called Kevin. They came within the hour. Kevin walked through my front door first and I did not say anything. I just opened my arms. He stepped into them the way he used to when he was small. Completely with his whole body, not the careful sideways hug of adults trying not to show too much. His whole body. He said into my shoulder, "I am so sorry, Mom." I said, "I know, sweetheart. I know." Emma came flying past both of us and launched herself at my legs and said, "Grandma Carol," at a volume that startled Biscuit off the windowsill, and I laughed, the kind of laugh that is also close to crying, and reached down and gathered her up. Jake toddled in behind everyone else, looked around with the serious expression of a 3-year-old surveying an unfamiliar room, and then spotted the cat and immediately forgot everything else. We had soup. We had bread. Kevin fixed the sticky drawer in my kitchen that had been stuck for 3 months. Emma told me approximately everything that had happened in her life since we last spoke, in the rapid-fire manner of a child who has a great deal of stored information to deliver. Jake ate half a bread roll and fell asleep on the living room rug. Sandra helped me wash up after lunch. We stood side by side at the sink, the same sink where I had stood so many times alone, washing up after meals I had eaten by myself, and we talked. Not about what had happened. Not about December or boundaries or any of it. We just talked. About Emma's school. About a book Sandra was reading. About the garden, which Sandra admitted she had never understood but which she said she had always found beautiful when she looked out my back window. It was small, but it was real. That evening after they left, I sat in Frank's old chair by the window. Biscuit was back in his spot. The house had that particular feeling it gets after being full of people. A warmth that lingers even after the noise has gone. I said quietly to the room, "They came back, Frank." He knew. Here's what I have learned. What all of this, the patience and the hurt and the 14 months and the Sunday morning at the door, what all of it has taught me. I have learned that sorry is not an ending. It is a beginning. A small, fragile, enormously important beginning. And what you build on top of it, the honest conversations, the patience, the willingness to actually see each other, that is where the real work is. I have learned that families are not made once. They are made over and over, in the choosing to come back, the choosing to open the door, the choosing to put the soup on even when you are not sure you are ready. I have learned that the people who hurt us most are often the people who are most afraid. Sandra was afraid. She was afraid of belonging to something bigger than herself because she had never had that and did not know how to trust it. I wish I had seen that sooner. I wish I had made more room for her fear instead of just my own. And I have learned, perhaps most importantly, that you can hold your dignity and still open the door. That forgiveness is not weakness. That saying "come in" when someone stands on your porch with honest eyes is not foolishness. It is the bravest, hardest, most necessary thing a person can do. If you are listening tonight and there is someone in your life who has hurt you, someone you have closed a door against, I am not telling you to open it. Only you know if that door should open. Only you know what was said and what was done and how deep the wound went. But I will tell you this. When Sandra stood on my porch in her gray coat with her careful hands and her tired eyes and she said, "I came to say sorry," I am so glad I stepped back and let her in. But as some doors once closed stay closed forever. And I did not want that to be the ending of our story. My name is Carol. I am 69 years old. My son came home. My grandchildren had soup at my table. And the roses, Frank, the roses are going to be beautiful this year. I think that is enough. I think that is more than enough.